Welcome to a fireside chat about system dynamics and about system dynamics at the University of Bergen in specific. My name is Bergen Experience and I'm a professor in system dynamics at the University of Bergen. The System Dynamics Group at the University of Bergen is the very proud host of this year's System Dynamics Conference. We would have loved to welcome you in person to the city of Bergen and the University of Bergen, and we're crushed that this is not possible due to the COVID situation. This year is a special year for us. It's a special year to host a conference because it's a year of multiple anniversaries. And we're going to talk about these anniversaries today. 25 years ago, the first students embarked on a master program in system dynamics at the University of Bergen. Ever since, we've graduated more than 300 students in our master program. 20 years ago, we hosted another System Dynamics conference. I wasn't there. I was definitely not there 25 years ago when it all began, but other people were. And so I'm very pleased to welcome Paul Davidson, Erling Moxnes, and John Moorcroft to this fireside chat. Paul Davidson is responsible for it all. He started the System Dynamics Master Program at the University of Bergen. Erling Moxnes joined soon thereafter. And John Moorcroft has always been an important part of our program. He was the first to evaluate our program, and he's been a source of constant support ever since. I'm thrilled to announce that John Moorcroft agreed to facilitate a conversation with Paul Davidson and Erling Moxnes about their experiences with system dynamics at the University of Bergen and beyond, and about their hopes for the future. Please join me in welcoming them, and I hope you look forward to a fireside chat as much as I do.
Welcome to this fireside chat, which we're calling the Bergen Experience. As Bergen explained, this is really a celebration of the many things that have been accomplished at the University of Bergen over the years by Paul and by Erling, and their ability to have created and sustained an academic space for system dynamics over that period of time. So what I'd like to do is just to launch off into some of the history of what you guys have been doing, and begin with this question. You both come from different parts of Norway, and you didn't know each other very well until the 1990s. So I'm curious to know, what were your separate pathways toward system dynamics?
Well, maybe I should start. For me, it all started with the establishment of the Department of Information Science, headed by my mentor, Professor Soin Norbotten. He had been to the United States when he was the production manager at the Statistics Norway. And his aim was to purchase a new computer, the first public computer or computer in public services in Norway. On his trip to the United States, he met with Jay Forrester and was very inspired by him. And when later he established the field of information science at the University of Bergen, system dynamics became a part of that program. He was teaching system dynamics first, and then I took over as his teaching assistant, and later on I was teaching system dynamics courses at that department. Then later on in 1984, I attended the Oslo conference, and there I met with many people, including George Richardson and John Sturm, and I was invited over to MIT in 1985 as a visiting scholar, and I worked with the two of them. Very inspiring times. Later on, I was invited back in 1990 and 91, and I was a co-director with Jay Forrester on the Roadmaps project. There I met several of the undergraduate students who since has become or left their marks in the field of system dynamics, including Rebecca Niles and Shane Gary and Will Glass-Hussein. My years at MIT with Jay Forrester, Sturman Richardson, and also Peter Senge, David Anderson, even Forrester's mentor, Gordon Brown, and many others, including you, John, were definitely the formative years of my career. The people I met there were extremely friendly. I felt that I found a second home for myself, and I appreciated and enjoyed immensely the many, often very fruitful interactions I had with senior system dynamicists and peers in my field. Then I returned to Bergen, and I suppose we'll get back to what happened then.
Okay, well, thanks, Paul, for that. There's some really great memories there of the many different people that you had encountered on your trip. Now, Erling, you followed a rather different route, but it would be nice to hear how you came to be with us as such an important part of the field.
My background was in electrical engineering, and probably inspired by the 68 generation, I started to be in doubt about the benefits of technology, so I switched to control engineering. And I had a professor called Jens Glad Balken, who was a very inspiring person and who understood that dynamics is all around us. And so he inspired me to look into economic systems. Well, his idea was that I could get as big a spreadsheet as I wanted, and I could have all the sectors in the economy and all the actors, and that seemed to be a big undertaking. And at the meeting he organized, where among others Jürgen Randers came and Leif Ervik from Bergen came, and during that seminar Leif Ervik asked me, "Why don't you come to Bergen?" And Leif Ervik had studied for a year up at Dartmouth with Dennis and Dana Meadows. So I said, well, I applied to a position in your institution half a year ago. I haven't heard anything yet. So he said, well, come down and talk to us. And I got a position in Bergen at the Christian Michelsen Institute. Then another episode happened. Dennis Meadows came to visit Leif Ervik and the group, and Leif drove him to the airport afterwards, and I was sitting in the back of the car, and Dennis said to Leif, "Why don't you send one of your guys over to Dartmouth?" And I raised my hand and said, "Could that be me?" So I ended up at Dartmouth and got my PhD with Dennis and Barry Richmond. And my thesis was, the topic was about macroeconomics. And at the time we had just started producing oil in Norway. So what I found to be an interesting topic was, how will this influence the Norwegian economy? So in my thesis, I analyzed the spending of income and came up with a rather simple idea that if oil prices go up and down, then the Norwegian economy will not be very stable. So the idea was then we need a buffer, and I came up with the idea that we need a petroleum fund abroad that can buffer all the variation. And when I came home, there was a committee established by government to discuss exactly this question. They got my thesis. I also used an oil price model that Leif Ervik and colleagues had developed already. And so I could show that the oil price is likely to move in cycles. And all this was acknowledged, and then, well, many years later, the fund was established and a strict rule for the use of the fund. Of course, in politics, nothing really happened as early as this early report, but it was established when there was no other way to do it. So when the conditions were there, then the report said, now you should do this and now you should do that. So that was a very interesting period. and then so I worked in this group at the Christian Michelsen Institute for several years, and then we moved on to the business school in Bergen, and then this guy Paul Davidson tended to show up in different situations, and one day he said, "Why don't you come and work with us?" And I was very eager to do that at the time, and I must say, after I joined the university, I both learned more about system dynamics, and the teaching was very useful for me. And I've had my best years at the University of Bergen.
Okay, Erling. Well, thank you for that. That story about the stabilization fund is really fascinating. And I guess I didn't realize that you had been at Dartmouth at the time Barry Richmond was there, because when I was at MIT, I was studying with Barry there. So we kind of share that piece in common. And then the mentioning of these names like Leif Ervik, which always seemed like mystical names from Scandinavia to me when I was developing in the field. So great to hear all that.
Let me mention one more thing, John. When I was at Dartmouth, I came across one of your articles on bounded rationality, which I found to be very interesting and has influenced a lot of the work I've done later on with the fishery experiment and the reindeer experiment and alcohol drinking experiments and so on. And having studied economics for some time, I was a bit influenced by the idea about rational decision making. And I had difficulties really believing that people with a lot of money, a lot of time, that they didn't make perfect decisions. So these experiments helped me understand what Forrester was talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting how those ideas were right there in the field at the time when Forrester originally set it up. He was talking about that notion of bounded rationality in a way. He didn't use that term himself, but he was definitely talking about it right from the beginning with his information view. But moving on then from that interesting history of both of you, how you came to be so involved in the field, can I move on to the program in Bergen, which started some 25 years ago? And if you could just say something, Paul, I guess, about what led up to that program, and also, how did you come to get the master and PhD program started? Because, my experience of academic institutions is it's quite tricky to get space to do things, and you obviously managed to do that and sustain it. So what's the story there?
Well, the story is that when I returned from the United States, I was offered a professorship in educational information science. And at the time, that sounded very appealing. I knew that both Richardson and Forrester were interested in the use of system dynamics in education. And through that professorship, I was able to promote system dynamics as a teaching tool, both in Norwegian schools and at the University of Bergen. And I suppose I had a name in terms of doing that. And then it came to the attention of the president of the university that I was working with system dynamics. And then one night, it was 11 o'clock in the night, the president of the University of Bergen called me. And if you get a call that late from the president, you really wonder. And I said, what have I done wrong here? What is it that I'm going to be scolded for now? And he said that he was sitting on his desk was a proposal by the Norwegian government to fund master students primarily from developing countries to come to Norway and take a master's education. And it needed to be a English language education. At that time, the University of Bergen didn't have very many English language educations. So he asked me whether I would be willing to establish a system dynamics program in English. Mind you, I couldn't admit Norwegian students into that program because Norwegian students at the time needed to be taught in Norwegian. So that all changed pretty radically after a few years. So needless to say, I said, yes, I need two things. I need, first of all, one more person. And I need, for this program, not to just hang out there on his own, but also to be leading up to a PhD education. He said yes to both of those requests. And I said, well, I suppose you need a program, you need a syllabus and stuff like that. When do I need to produce that? And I was thinking maybe a week or two or so. And he said, tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So I had 12 hours night shift to design the program and lay it before him. And he sent it off to the Ministry of Education. It was approved. And a few weeks thereafter, I think I might have called Ali Moxnes. At the time, he was immersed in research and was not interested in education. So I turned to John Sturm and I called him and I said, do you have any new candidates that might be willing to come over? And a few weeks after, I was on the plane to Massachusetts to interview with David Ford. And I met his wife and his cat. And just a few months thereafter, he was on his way, moved to Bergen and stayed 4 or 5 years, helping me teaching, helping me form this program up until the Millennium and the Millennium Conference that we had in Bergen.
Right.
So it just, as many things in life, was a happenstance. It was just, I was there at the right time with the right ideas when somebody called. And I think that's how things are happening in life.
Well, it's very interesting, that, Paul, because as you say, you got a call out of the blue at 11 o'clock at night. But I think it's the ability you had then to be alert to the opportunity and have in mind what it was you would ask for right at that moment, where it's not necessarily immediately come to mind to most people, and believe in yourself enough that even though you hadn't yet got it going, that it could actually be done. So that's really very interesting.
Well, that was the time when I had a lot of self-confidence. Remember, I'd been twice to MIT.
That hasn't changed, has it, Paul?
And I remember something Forrester had told me, namely, he, in a sense, he regretted that system dynamics had been established only at MIT, this very prestigious university, where he was up against a lot of very famous people, lots of Nobel Prize winners, economists, and so on and so forth. And he said he system dynamics was met with a lot of resistance. And he said, if you're going to establish a system dynamics program, and that we might touch upon later on today, maybe you should try a less prestigious, maybe a novel university, a university in need of creating its own programs. And I think at the time, the University of Bergen was exactly in that kind of entrepreneurial phase. And I think that's exactly what this story tells you, that people were reaching out and people were offering resources where people had ideas. So I think
that's a good point. I mean, as you say, an entrepreneurial university, but you also do need an entrepreneur in there, and that was you. Anyway, moving on then from that, while we're still on this history theme, perhaps you can just say a bit about the overall structure of the program and why you believe its design has been successful over many years.
Well, I can say a few words. The first first semester is about teaching the students system dynamics from the basics and up to the more advanced level. And that's all that happens really the first semester. And then we have courses where we apply system dynamics, and these courses have been very interesting to students, I think, and many of them we have had examples of students that came to study management, maybe with a profit motive, hoping to earn a lot of money, and then after a while they have turned to social problems and less potential income, I guess, because they got inspired by the courses that we give. So Paul may add something there.
No, I think that's right. It's a 2-year program, leads up to a Master of Philosophy, and it is a program that at the moment is taught with 3 semesters of coursework and 1 semester of thesis. It covers a lot of fields, from technical system dynamics, methodological issues, and a lot on applications. And over the years, we've turned the applications to a large extent in the direction of sustainable development and resilience. We've turned it to a large extent towards the public sector, and we have always had a very strong element of education and teaching in the program. What has happened over a large number of years of wide time span, from our use of PowerSim, the software PowerSim, to now use of Stella, has enabled us to develop interactive learning environments and games and so on. And we're now teaching our students to develop these environments. That it also enables us to develop educational packages that we can put on the web. And I think that's a part of our education which is fairly unique, and which enables us to be in the forefront of education in this field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's good. I mean, I've always thought it was really, really useful to have that kind of educational resource available within your kind of depth that you were able to deliver of multiple courses, building expertise, which is really hard to create elsewhere, where, as I say, getting space in the curriculum is not an easy task. You have done it and maintained it. Well, okay, that's been great. That slice of history from both of you. I think there's probably a lot to be said about the way the program developed in terms of both the people who are involved, the partners with whom you worked, and also the ideas that this whole program generated as it took root and began to grow. So can I begin with the people? Who has been involved as teachers in the program over these 25 years of the program, and what impact do you think they've had on the program?
Well, in addition to David Ford, and of course Alan, who's sitting here now, we were fortunate to have Yeoman Barlas visit us for a year. He had enormous impact on the shall we say, the structural and methodological components of the program, and I think that was very important. And he also introduced us to Ali Seisel, who came and worked with us for a period of 4 years. Then when he departed, we had a student of ours who just had graduated and with a PhD, and his name was David Wheat. He had been a consultant in the United States, but prior to that, he had been to the White House and was one of the youngest advisors to the United States president. So I thought, he had a lot of phenomenal baggage to bring to Bergen and to work with us on the field of economics, and particularly education in economics. He has been teaching ever since and is still doing so, although he retired and is now Professor Emeritus with us. He reached out to many countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, and this includes Ukraine, Lithuania, and Latvia. And he was able to create funding for student and teachers exchange with Bergen, a program that's still ongoing and has been extremely successful. His visits to Ukraine and the visits of students and teachers from Ukraine has been very, very important to both countries. So important that when the Norwegian Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs are visiting Ukraine, one of the projects and one of the initiatives that they are concerned with and that they visit is his program in Ukraine. He's also, needless to say, reached back to the United States, and we've had an excellent relationship with the University of North Dakota with student and teachers exchanges there as well. So he's been very instrumental in reaching out and helping us with the internationalization of our program.
Yeah, I know I've talked with David Wheat on a number of occasions, and he does also relay his enjoyment of living and working in Bergen. He really found that to be a great experience, which does remind me, Paul and Erling, too, of one little anecdote I'd like to add into this. This was way back at the very beginning of the program when I came over, you remember, Paul, to that evaluation that took place of the beginning of the program, and there were like 3 of us who were involved in doing this, 2 other people, I think, from Sweden. This was back in May 1994. And 2 things I want to say about this. One is, I think we were, all 3 of us, very impressed with what you had in mind, but I did think, this is a pretty ambitious program. However, you pulled it off. The other thing is that I do remember before going to Bergen, I heard this kind of expectation about the weather, that it was going to be rainy and wet all the time. And I just had such a different experience. It's sunshine every single day I was there. So still around with this impression that Bergen is a bright, sunny place and nice and warm all the time. That's not a misperception of feedback, is it?
Paul tells the new students, that don't worry about the rain, because in Bergen it stops raining very often.
The obvious example is the Millennium Conference in Bergen, where it was raining the entire conference, except for during the banquet at Fløyen. And I had the opportunity to tell that we had to pay a lot for that sunshine, those few hours.
Back to the teachers, we should also mention Steve Alessi, who is an expert in education. And in 2012, we got a project to develop a distance learning course, a MOOC, and he was very instrumental in creating that course. And also, we have a very good relationship with the Millennium Institute in Washington, D.C., where Matteo Pedicini, an earlier PhD student in our program, he's teaching our course on development. So that he has also been very important for teaching. And I guess we should also mention the president of the society, Birgit Kopinski, who came to the program, is it 4 or 5 years ago, Paul?
Well, she came early on, much earlier than that, as a researcher in our program. But then through her impressive research portfolio, immediately after David Wheat left, was appointed a full professor in our group. So we were extremely lucky and happy to have her work with us. Also because it identifies our need for diversity in the field and in our group. And including also then Billy Schoenberg from IC Systems, who has been instrumental in teaching the interactive learning environment course that we've had for years now.
That's very interesting, and you've obviously had a very good team of people you've been able to bring together and collaborate with, and between you all, I guess, develop your knowledge and understanding and mastery of the field in a whole variety of ways. Now, that was the sort of faculty that were involved. Perhaps we can move on a little bit to the students. As Birgit had mentioned, some 300 master's and PhD students have graduated from the program. Do you know what careers some of these candidates have pursued? What became of it?
It's a little difficult to keep count of who went where, but we have some indications at least. We have not mentioned, but I think we should mention that in 2009, in collaboration with the Radboud University, University of Lisbon, and the University of Palermo, we established a European Masters in System Dynamics. We might comment more on that later. But there we have a very good indication, because we know where these students got a career. And 40% of them ended up in academics, in the academic sector. 25% in management and consulting, about 30% in IT work, and 8% in the public sector, working for a variety of governments. So I think that that gives us an indication of where people also in our regular Bergen Masters program have gone. In other words, a very substantial component of academic workers, and I think that is great, because one way or the other, this brings system dynamics out in the world, and they're spread all across the world, these candidates at the moment. Notably, many of them, many of the initial students that we had were students from China. Some of them returned to China, and others have got their PhDs in other universities, both in the United States and Hong Kong and so on, and are now university professors in a wide variety of countries across the world. So that shows where they have been going. If you look at the PhD candidates that we have educated, and those are about 22 at the moment, and I think we do have 14 in the pipeline. There are, again, quite a few, I would say almost 50% of them, who have ended up in the academic sectors as full or associate professors. Some of them in research institutions, a few of them in consulting companies, either as partners or regular consultants. So I think, again, academics, teaching, research has been the main absorber of our students in the world. And I think that's fascinating, but it also is perhaps somewhat worrying, because what we want is for system dynamicists to be practitioners, to go out there and make a change. Clearly, you do that when you're in the academic sector, and you might have a very significant leverage. On the other hand, we would like practitioners to be, or our students to become practitioners, and as well. And I think we're gradually seeing a change in that profile, because as we might talk about later on, the world seems to be in need of systems thinkers and system dynamicists to address the current challenges that we're facing.
Okay, well, that's good to hear about these various paths that your students have followed. And as you say, it would be good to see us being able to utilize that skill to address these significant challenges that we are facing in the current era, so to speak. But your mention of the Erasmus program brings me to another topic that I think would be interesting to hear about from both of you, which are the partners that you have worked with over the years. So together with Radboud University, University of Palermo, and the new University of Lisbon, you established in 2009 the European Masters in System Dynamics, which in part was funded by the Erasmus Mundus Stipend Program. So, what's your view about that, how that program has developed, what it's sort of added on top of what you were doing, and how it's been able to impact the recruitment of students into our field?
Obviously, the stipends were very important in recruiting very good students. We had more applicants, and we had some really good students coming into the program. So that was very important. It's very inspiring to work with excellent students.
Was it difficult to get the funding, by the way? I mean, again, this is creating academic space, being able to get hold of funding, which many academics are competing for usually.
Yes, it was challenging. Jacques Venix, who initiated this effort together with me, was able to acquire a funding for a 3-year planning period from the EU until we then started the program. And so that means that a lot of planning went into the program. And it was pretty, the competition was pretty fierce in those days. And it still is for this kind of money. We were able to extend an initial 5-year funding period to 9 years. And I think that was an indication that we had done well and that the program was well received both by the students and by the EU community at large. So I should say that the institution that has coordinated this program is Radboud University. Credit to them, and Bergen has been one out of the 3 other partners in the program. It's interesting to notice that yes, you had champions like Jacques Venix in Nijmegen, you had Paula Antunes in Lisbon, you had Carmine Bianchi in Palermo. But since then, many of the people who are now running these programs have had their experience from Bergen. Except for Etienne Rouet in Radboud, we have Nuno Videira, who did a master's in Bergen. We have people in
Enzo Bevona.
In Palermo, Enzo Bevona, and Federico Constans, who also have been to Bergen and done had their education from here. So this indicates how a program can spread once you have a good basis and a solid basis.
Yeah.
And very important has been the different capabilities, the different topics that the different institutions teach. So it has made the program much more interesting for the students.
Not to mention the different climates, by the way. I always had this joke with Carmine about the sunshine of Sicily.
and then the food, and then the wine.
Yes.
So there are indeed very different cultures. And I think that's one of the things that the students traveling across Europe are appreciating, namely that the environments in which they're working differ very much from one country to the next. Maybe even surprisingly different.
And maybe it's one of the reasons for the strength of the program that they start out in Bergen, where they do not spend all that time out in the sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
Sit down and work.
Right.
I know that among the students, Mondello Beach in Palermo is a favorite place.
Right. Okay, so that's something on the partners that you've worked with over the years. I suppose the other very, very important thing in the development of a program like the one you have is really about the ideas that get generated among this team of collaborating people in terms of both research and also teaching. So let me begin then with this question about you've worked with and contributed, both of you in many ways, to the development of different methods to be used by system dynamicists. So what can you say about
that? Sorry. I started working with optimization. That was part of my education in control theory. And I saw some potential there. And so I didn't develop the method, but I worked with PowerSim to implement a method for optimization in system dynamics models. And let me say a few words about optimization. When I was at Dartmouth, I understood that optimization is not really what system dynamics should be doing. But there are some interesting findings. When you try to optimize in a model, then every weakness in that model tend to be revealed because the optimization program finds all these loopholes to maximize the criterion. So many times I found mistakes in models when doing optimization. If a flow can flow in the opposite direction, then the optimization program can make use of that and make a fish resource increase by negative deaths, for instance. So the optimization is interesting in both because it gives you a different view of the model, but also because finding good policies in a complex model is difficult. And I think we often fool ourselves by thinking that we have found the very best solution when we have simulated for some time. And this is particularly the case when you have uncertainty, because then you're dealing with distributions and how do you really deal with that? It's this insurance question, for instance. If there is uncertainty, then you should have a certain amount of insurance. And that's not easy to do by intuition. So there existed a method called optimization in policy space, where you make it's pretty much like we do when we just play with models. You try different policies, different relationships between the stocks and the action. But you cannot do thousands of tests to find out what is best, but the optimization program can do that for you. So this method of optimization in policy space is very suited for system dynamics models. And so I worked with PowerSim to develop a program we called SOPS that could do this. It was kind of an addition to PowerSim. I expected this to be a great success commercially for PowerSim. There are very few people that are aware of and interested in this for the moment. But now it's also implemented in Stella, and I must say, it's a very elegant implementation so that it has become much easier. Right now I'm using it to analyze the behavioral models, that's also something you can do with optimization. So that's one of the things I was working on before I came to the System Dynamics group, and one of the things I was able to do was to find out what are the implications of measurement error in the optimization literature. That is something that leads to what they call an expanding state space, and that doesn't sound good. The number of states increase towards infinity, and then the programs break down. But with this method, it was possible to find a solution. And I happened to sit down with the editor of the journal where I published the article, and he said, you know, we had great difficulties finding a reviewer for that article because it was so different from what they were used to. And often optimization, when the economists and others work with optimization, they simplify the model until they're able to find an perfect optimal solution. Mm-hmm. And then they leave the difficult part to the decision maker. But with this optimization in policy space, you can use the model you have, no matter how complicated it is, and then you find a simplified solution that takes account of all the complexities in your model, non-linearities and the uncertainties and so on.
Yeah. It's interesting, Erling, really interesting to hear you talk about optimization, because, you know, I've always enjoyed your papers in that area, partly because it seems to me you're able to strike that middle ground in optimization, which fits with what we do in policy analysis in system dynamics, that you're kind of conscious of the need in system dynamics to discover policies that are kind of robust, and these methods that you talk about seem to belong with that tradition. And you know, that I found in that paper of yours that appears in the book, the edited book that Hagier and et al. Had put together. You have a very nice paper in there that I often look at. So yeah, good to hear about.
One nice thing there was that I used an example from the engineering, an inverted pendulum, and it was nice to approach the problems I'd been working with before with this new method. So that I enjoyed that very much.
Uh-huh. You have an inverted pendulum at home anywhere?
Yeah.
Have you optimized it? Right. Okay. Well, that's good. Paul, do you have anything to add on this?
Well, I would like to say that my interest in system dynamics has been in the field of education, and then that turned into me realizing that I didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't understand complex dynamic systems, and it led to my curiosity about the relationship between structure and behavior in such systems. And one of those that facilitated facilitated my understanding and helped me work with this was one of my first PhD student, Mohammed Saleh, who's currently a professor in University of Cairo. He worked on a thesis on eigenvalue analysis, and has later worked with Christian Kampmann, and we've also worked with Rodrigo Oliva on these issues. So that formal analysis of complex dynamic systems led to a lot of insights on my part, at least, and the way that Rodrigo Oliva has now embedded that kind of thinking into software that allows you to analyze models is very, very important.
Paul, would it
However,
be? I was going to ask: would you have an example of that sort of insight in particular that you found from exploring these formal relationships between structure and behavior, some in the context of some model that you're particularly interested in?
Well, what it does is to allow us to, first of all, decompartmentalize the behavior into behavioral modes that then are, it's a summation or aggregation of behavioral modes that is expressed in the behavior of the model. Those modes can then be linked back to the parameters of the model that are important in driving those behaviors and making those behaviors a significant component of those behavior components, a significant part of the overall behavior of the model. In other words, that way you're able to link the structure and the parameters of a model to the behavior of a model. And that is very important both in our attempt at understanding why models behave the way they do, and even more importantly, in influencing that behavior through parameter modifications and policies that govern these parameters. So I think that is the main contribution there. The problem is with eigenvalue analysis that it applies primarily, or at least it's feasible primarily in the context of relatively small models. And it also requires you to chop up the time in the simulation and to linearize the model around those operating points. And that means that there are some very clear limitations, and it's therefore interesting to see the complementation of these analytic tools with what's happening now, for instance, by the work of Billy Schoenberg, that's now been implemented in IC systems. He's, by the way, also a PhD candidate at the University of Bergen, and has developed a thesis on his numerical approach to the analysis of feedbacks and feedback dominance or governance analysis. So I think the complementation between the analytic and the numerical tools is a fascinating field. It also has brought me to go back to another part of the literature, namely feedback loop dominance analysis, something that I sort of thought started with George Richardson and his papers, but brought me even further back to works in the early days, which led me to consider or sort of say that we all know that there are problems with causal loop diagramming, with the concept of positive feedback and negative feedback and the interrelationship between these, because in many systems, what is identified as a positive feedback loop might easily not only lead to behavior that you expect from such a loop, namely reinforcing behavior. It also can produce such a loop other kinds of behavior that we normally attribute to negative feedback loops. So I'm wondering, and I have been wondering for years, how is this all? And my current work is exactly on that. And what I found was, going back to the very early works in system dynamics, the gain concept was an important concept. And maybe I'm now thinking that the feedback loop, talking about positive and negative feedback loops, is perhaps not so important, but that the gain, that is the strength of the various loops, be they defined as positive or negative loops, is perhaps even more important. So that's hopefully my main contribution for the years to come in methodological research.
Yeah, okay, Paul. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think, it's a sort of area in general that we we're all grappling with in these models that are relatively complex by comparison, as with Erling was saying, by comparison with the very simplified models that often come out of management science and operations, where the focus is on optimization. But somehow we have to find ways to make sense of the complexity within our models, the interconnectedness, and that seems to be an integral part of doing that. And I think it does actually enable us to transition really to the last part of what I wanted us to talk about, which is to do with the future. About the future of the program and about the future of the field. And actually just coming back for a moment to that topic of analysis methods, I'd be curious to hear your view, both of your views, on what seems to be a movement in the field, a contemporary movement in the field, to what I would describe as computationally intense methods of modeling and analysis, by contrast to, if you like, the less computationally intensive methods that have been prevalent in the field for many years. However, I'll open it up to you. It's about the future in general, so whatever you might have to say.
I was visiting MIT a few years back, and I sat in on a class on analytics, and I was impressed by by results that could increase the profits of a business by 10% overnight. And then I compare that to System Dynamics, where we tell the business leader that he is the reason why things are not going well, and if he just follows our suggestions, then in 10 years' time things will be much better. So I can see, I'm not saying that that's the way the world is, but because some of these gains you get from analytics can also be eaten up in a few years' time. An airline that goes to a new system of setting prices will of course be followed by other airlines doing exactly the same. So I can see the enthusiasm for some of those methods, that it can promise a lot in a short time. And so it doesn't make it easier for us in the competition, but we shouldn't give up.
And would you say we're sort of part of the analytics movement?
I think, Paul, you know some of the stuff that Billy Schomburg has been doing that may say something about how the gap can be bridged.
Yes, well, my attitude in terms of where System Dynamics is positioning itself is it's not on the far numerical end or the analytic end. What it does is, in a sense, to bridge the gap between qualitative and quantitative methods. And I think if we lift our quantitative perspective into, or aggregate, or should we say abstract from that, we're entering into the field of qualitative reasoning. And I think going there is important. What, in a sense, worries me is that sometimes artificial intelligence methods are used in order to identify structures in extremely complex dynamic systems. And I think that is worrying, because in the basic models that are being used there's extremely little feedback. And I'm optimistic about System Dynamics making a major contribution in that field, particularly in the way we interpret the results from those attempts at analytically deriving structure from data, data mining. but this is definitely in the future, and I am hesitant with respect to what extent that enables us to move the world forward. In other words, to let computers identify structure in biology, in astronomy, and so on and so forth. I think there's still a human component, the interpretation of the results that comes out of that is important. At least if we're going to understand what the computers are telling us and act thereupon.
It's interesting that, Paul, that you mentioned the idea of the amount of feedback that you may expect to find within a model, or that might be discovered somehow, and that you sense that sometimes there's not as much there as you would normally have expected. And it actually does remind me of a couple of things. One, going back to Erling's point, that he, early in his career, he encountered somebody who told him that dynamics are everywhere. That I think is an interesting point of view. Dynamics will be found everywhere. There's probably structures lying behind that. And it also reminds me, when I was at MIT, we had Nathaniel Mass instructing us. I don't remember Nathaniel being one of our very key people in the field. And he always would say to PhD students coming into the field, he would challenge them to name any situation in business and society that did not involve feedback. And that was an interesting discipline, to have somebody being so insistent that you could find it, because I must say I was very doubtful about that proposition early on, but it seemed to carry weight when he explained it. But yes, so let's carry on some more about the development of the future of the field, building on what you've said, Paul, and also, to some extent, maybe taking us into the educational developments, because you've worked on these MOOCs. You've said you've actually got an EU project, apparently, to develop MOOCs. So if there's anything else you'd like to add on that topic, it will be very interesting to hear.
Yeah, we got a project together with our European partners, those we have worked with in the Erasmus program, and also Paolo Goncalves and Andra Blomberga in Riga. And we got this project to develop both system dynamics courses and application courses in sustainability transformation. So the idea came out of the work I did with Steve Alessi to develop this MOOC in natural resources management, a course that has been running now every semester for 8 years. And we got very good feedback. The students became very much engaged and did really well, many of them, in the course. It also, we came in contact with people from UNEP, the United Nations program for the development. And so many of people in the African department there, they have taken the course, and Paul is now engaged in a research project in Africa as a result of that MOOC. And also the MOOC has brought us PhD students that took the course and then got interested in our program. So the main motivation now for the new project is that we need teaching capacity, and we need to reach out with system dynamics. Publishing papers in good journals is not convincing a lot of students in the short run. So at least my idea is that we can reach out much more by having MOOCs that anybody could take, and MOOCs that become part of the regular teaching programs at the partner universities, so that they can offer a wider variety of courses in system dynamics and in sustainability transformation, which is a hot topic these days.
I think that that the reaching out component is extremely important. It means that we can reach out to a large number of students, teachers, practitioners that otherwise would have no opportunity to come to a location here in Europe and to study, or the United States for that matter. So we're able now to diversify our teaching across very many different people, very many different income groups, and so on and so forth. And I think that is a very important step forward in bringing system dynamics to people who really need that perspective. When it comes to the future of system dynamics, I don't think it just relies on us. We have the tools, we have the perspectives, we have the methods. What we need is the realization that these methods and these tools and this perspective is useful. And I think the way the world is developing now, climate change is one very clear evidence. The pandemic we experience now is another very clear evidence that the world is moving in a direction where the need for these methods become much more apparent. What we primarily needs to do now is to tell decision makers, policy designers, strategists that, listen here, we have something that might help you in addressing those complex issues. And I think that is a reinforcing feedback loop. In other words, when people become aware of our existence and our contribution, that will drive an interest in the field, which we ourselves would not be able to propel. I think it is the needs of the societies we're working in that brings about the need for system dynamics. So an example is exactly what Alan now talked about. In Africa, there is a growing conflict between a growing human population and the wildlife. And UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, became aware of our education and our research and invited us to participate in the study of the Kaza area, Kavanga Zambezi area, which is an area in southern Africa as large as France, covering 5 different countries, and with the largest savanna elephant herd and other wildlife, and an area which has experienced that conflict between wildlife and human beings, and which is also under great pressure from the international community to make sure that the conservation measures that are taken is saving the elephant and other rare species. And we were brought into that project. We assembled a team in Europe of 7 modelers that have conducted studies, group model building sessions with about 100 experts in that area. Mm-hmm. And we were in one session gathered for 7 days, intensively working in the different sectors such as wildlife, water, agriculture, tourism, and so on and so forth, and are currently about to produce a comprehensive model of that area. That call for such a system dynamics project would not have come had there not been problems, had there not been complex dynamic issues to be addressed. And I think that call will be stronger and stronger as the world is developing. Yeah. And we just need to be there, as you said earlier, we need to be there ready to jump on the bandwagon and help out wherever we can.
Well, that's a great story, Paul, about reaching out. I do agree with you that ability, willingness and desire to reach out to different groups of people in the way you describe, and actually on the scale you describe in that project in Africa, is a good way for us to be moving forward. Which actually brings me, I think, to my last question here, because this reaching out requires people, more people who are trained well to do this kind of thing. So do you have any advice for members of our society who wish to start up a program like the one that you've not only started but sustained for 25 years? And on the basis of your experience and wisdom and so forth, what do you see as the main obstacles to doing this?
Well, one thing one should be prepared for is criticism, and the fact that all your colleagues will not be extremely happy about what you're doing. But all the criticism can be used as fire in the fireplace to make yourself more productive and even more eager to reach the goals that you set. So you will always get criticism, but get over it and use it for the best.
I think that if we try to compete with established fields, economics as an example, and make that our priority, I don't think we will get very far. I think what we need to do is to demonstrate the ability for us to contribute in various fields of application. And then as you grow stronger within such a field of application, it could be environmental sciences, or it could be in economics for that matter, and gain a reputation for producing interesting results, then you can step on that and begin to build up a more solid methodological foundation in your courses. Very, very many places in the world, system dynamics is taught as part of an applied science field. That makes it hard for the professors involved to conduct research and to teach in system dynamics methodology. That is needed, but I think the stepping stone for doing so is to demonstrate interesting, important, often surprising results in areas of application, be that in health sciences, in organizational theory, in ecology, in sustainability, or whatever. And I think at the University of Bergen, the interest that the leadership of the university has had in sustainable development has helped us hone our profile in a direction which is now a popular field, a field which the leadership has a major attention, pays a lot of attention to. And they call us up and they actually say, could you help us in both the research and the establishment of educational programs in this field, which we think is important for the future of our world. And I think that's the way to go.
And may I add that those who want to start programs in system dynamics and sustainability, look up the MOOCs that we will be producing in Europe and send us an email, and we'll give you advice on how you could make use of that to establish a good program from the very beginning with many courses.
Yeah, these MOOCs are going to be free for use. So that means that whoever feels that they can incorporate these MOOCs in their own education should feel free to do so.
Good. Well, I think a couple of points here. I think we're at the end here now, I think, of a long fireside chat. Your point, Paul, about being able to get the attention and interest of the institutional leaders is an important one, and it seems you have indeed been successful in doing that from time to time along the way. And I guess you don't still get calls at 11 o'clock in the evening, but it may still happen, I suppose. And Erling, your point about the fire in the fireplace and being able to live with criticism, one, it belongs very nicely with our fireside chat, I have to say, that thought. And it is an important part of what goes on in our field. There is going to be criticism. I don't think that's unique to our field. It's the nature of a lot of academic discourse, really, but we have an intense version of it from time to time. But listen, guys, thank you very much, both of you, for all you've been able to tell us and giving us the benefit of your experience in setting up a program. You guys have been academic leaders who have nurtured people, partners, and ideas. So long may the Bergen Experience continue. And thanks very much for this.
Thank you.
To chat with you and hear everything you've done.
Thank you very much.